Greetings! You're watching Septum Sin vs. the World. I'm Septum Sin. Today we're going to do a review of a classic, a horror movie from the 80s that many of you know, many of you love, and many of you can't get enough, and we are talking about The Stuff. I figured that was some more appropriate for this particular film. So, what is it about The Stuff that makes it so interesting? That was the question I had when I heard about this a while back. I'm always looking at cult classics, looking at these things that people will say, yes, this was awesome. This is a great 80s horror. You've got to take it. You got to pick it up. I had gotten this with another one from this time period. Ended up watching the other one. Had left this on the burner, and then we had to look at this and examine this film for Inside Movies Galore's discussion, which I will link to in the description down below. This particular film is about this stuff that comes bubbling out of the ground. And then somebody takes a taste of it and says, this is good, let's sell this to people. Quickly, the stuff becomes the next big thing. There are commercials about it, and like this one here.
The stuff is here now, great new taste sensation, light and free now. Gives you elevation. Enough is never enough. Enough is never enough of the stuff.
The stuff, the taste that makes you hungry for more. The stuff, taste that delivers.
Enough is never enough. Enough is never enough.
And it's just everywhere. And people are eating it and eating it and eating it. But there is something such as there's too much of a good thing. And we find out that the stuff is not quite what those people were bargaining for when they took the first bite. The 80s-ness of this film is its boon and its curse. But we're not talking about the curse part just yet. So let's talk about why it's so cool. First off, for any of you 80s nostalgia freaks, watch this film. Everything there is perfect. To the commercials themselves. You are seeing it and you're going, I've seen commercials like that on TV in the 80s. And sure enough, as I grew up in the 80s, that is exactly what it was like. And I could see a product named The Stuff. You won't really see that these days, but in the 80s and 90s, oh heck yeah, you'd see that. Especially early 90s and mid to late 80s, you would definitely see that. So the nostalgia factor is very real here. If you liked 80s and you liked 80s horror, you will like this film. If you like trauma, you will like this film. Because there's a very trauma-esque vibe to it. I feel like they did a really good job with the practical effects with what they had at that time. I mean, they were using things like fire extinguisher foam, shaving cream, ice cream. These things were being used to do that. And they had a couple of scenes where they actually used old school computer footage to help, like the big pools of it, and the stuff in the truck and that scene. This shows some of the strength behind it at the time. So the special effects are fairly well on point, and for the most part, they hold up today. Which is weird, because even in movies, it reminds me of movies like The Blob. And the original Blob, you would think, because of how long ago it was, it would not hold up today. Other than the theme song, which I still don't quite understand what they were going for with that particular tone of theme song for a horror film. But I digress. We do see that these films do a good job with what they have, and this one definitely did a great job with what it had. The story was quite engaging and was a great reflection of the consumerist culture that was dominating in the 80s. We're in the midst of Ronald Reagan, consumerism, capitalism, sell, sell, sell. And no time period, in my opinion, was more into the junk food, where there are more varieties of sugary cereal than in that 80s to 90s period. It was just like, that was the boom. That was the boom for that whole thing. Consumerism, capitalism was on top of the world. We had not yet fallen. And it was really odd. You would see some of these things, some of these gyms open up, but you would also see all these people drinking this artificial stuff like this Diet Coke, Tab. Tab is a definitive child of the 80s. And this really does reflect that particular thing, that sort of reckless, we're just going to put it out in the market. We can bribe these people. We can keep some of these things secret. And it was a literal jab at this particular market. And even then, when people know that it's bad for them, they don't care. They do it anyway. I thought that the music, again, 80s-tastic. So the music is back with that double edge. For those of you who love the 80s, this has the music for you. You will be like in love with this film. So take a good look at it, take a good listen. This film is great on that aspect. The acting was so-so. But as far as the lead goes, oh yeah, the lead was great. I mean, the main two, I thought they did a great job. Some of the side actors did a great job, but there are only a few kind of lowball acting bits. But for the most part, great stuff. And but overall, good cheesy 80s horror magic. So what's the downside? Well, one, I mentioned trauma. I sometimes have a hard time with trauma because trauma's practical effects, though they are awesome, they kind of leave you sick to the stomach. And this can leave you with that feeling. The effects are that gross horror effect. And that's not always a good thing. We also look at the 80s, and the 80s nostalgia can hit you with the other edge. And that is, if you really didn't grow up in the 80s and you're not like some nostalgia buff or some person who's like, I really think the 80s were the coolest time period, I wish I'd grown up there, I love everything from the 80s, you may have a harder time getting into this film because the 80s vibe is so strong with it. If you are not into the 80s vibe, if you've never lived it and you're not one of those people who obsesses over it, you're going to have a harder time getting into this film. I think if you stay for it and you watch it all the way through, you will be able to pick up the vibe, you'll be stronger for it, and when you see it again, you'll be good, but you'll have to get through it on that first run to get the full effect and full enjoyment. The acting, I said, was on point for the most part, but there were certain factors that bothered me, and one of those factors was the child. I was bothered, and the actors in the beginning. There were two things that bothered me more than anything else. One was the first scene. It was so ridiculous of how at the very beginning the person walks up and just starts eating it. If I see something bubbling up from the ground that I cannot identify, my first reaction isn't, it tastes good. No, it's usually, what the heck is this? Hey, Mar, what's this? Maybe poke it with a stick, get some of it, bring it someplace to have it analyzed. To me, it was a little bit of a campy run. I think that's really what they were going for, but at the same time, it was kind of off-putting for me. Then finally, there's a scene which illustrates a lot which is wrong with the child actor in here. It's the child actor. There was so much they could have done with this particular character. He had some depth going for him. He was losing his family. He was one of the ones that was wising up to things. He was the one that had what he needed to get things done. They didn't need to go, I'm the typical incompetent kid who needs saving route. They could have done so much better with this kid than they did. I feel like it's wasted potential, and a lot of the stuff, like there's a scene where a kid crawls into an empty tanker truck. When, I'm sorry, he's old enough that common sense should dictate that, yes, they might try and fill that truck up with something. I feel like he was just put in there at points because they needed someone to save. And that just is disappointing. So, looking at things like that, and maybe if you are very pro-capitalist, pro-consumerism, this also might get to you a little bit. But otherwise, it's not that bad a film. It was really enjoyable. Kept me awake the whole way through. It's got a good cult following. Music is great. Just a few little detractors, such as it might be a little bit past its time. But otherwise, good solid film. Well worth watching. I give The Stuff 7 out of 10. So, what did you think of The Stuff? Write it down in the comments below. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Did you know about the stuff before I started talking about it? Or were you more like, what the heck is this thing? Definitely let me know below. Like the video, subscribe, share, and I will see you on the next one.